Good morning. Welcome in, everybody. I'm pretending I live in a snowy area, but I hope it's lovely by you today. I want to welcome everybody back to the California Climate and Energy Collaborative Teams Learn meetings. This is our 25th Learn meeting. It's Local Energy Resources Network. We appreciate everybody continuing to come back. This is our last meeting of the year, of course, and I don't know about you, but it was a big year of funding, just like we predicted it would be. So I was wondering if folks would mind introducing yourself over chat. You can put yourself on webcam if you like. When you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're from, and hey, tell us if you got any new awards this year. I hope you took advantage of the big year. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. We've got a nice big meaty meeting today. I'll start with my introduction. I'm Angie Hacker. I am the CEC Statewide Best Practices Coordinator, joined today by a couple other members of the CEC team, John and Tila. They'll say hello over chat. You can connect with them if you need any help. Like always, this meeting is designed to provide space for local governments and those that work with them to dive in on programs and opportunities that can help you advance your energy and climate goals. So you come here, get briefed on some of these timely opportunities, and then go back to work because we know how busy you are. Today, the meat of our discussion after we do our opportunity roundtable is going to be this is our second time doing this, maybe third time doing this, where we've done a year-end wrap-up on policy, and we're really fortunate today to be joined by Stephen Moss and Roger Dickinson, both part of the CivicWell family, and they're going to provide both legislative and regulatory dates for 2023 and looking ahead to 2024. We'll end with a short BPC workshop, and then if you want to hang around for some informal networking, stick around for 15 minutes of bonus breakouts. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the Opportunity Roundtable for this month. Make myself arranged here a little differently. So, as always, what we like to do here is invite you from your vantage point to share any opportunities that you're aware of. It could look like an event, a training opportunity, a funding opportunity, something you want to share that's been successful, a program you're offering. Please share that in the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we know. We do this every month where we kind of provide you with this hyperlink cheat sheet. You'll get it at the end so you don't have to frantically take notes. It's not beautiful, but it gives you a pretty comprehensive list of the things that are active. In terms of funding, I'm only going to go over a couple of things in a little more detail, and we'll talk about a couple of input opportunities. While I do that, just don't forget to go ahead and add anything else you know of into the chat. The first one I wanted to talk about was the DOE's Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership grant. So there are concept papers for this program due on January 12th. This might sound familiar. This is the second round of this federal funding opportunity. This one is going to be worth $3.9 billion. And through fiscal years 2024 and 25. And for this network, I really think the sub-program to pay attention to is the Grid Innovation Program. It's $1.82 billion, and it's designed to provide financial assistance to one or more states, tribes, local governments, and public utility commissions. So it's intended to collaborate with electric grid owners and operators to deploy projects that use innovative approaches to transmission, storage, and distribution infrastructure to enhance grid resilience and reliability. So the program will prioritize projects that provide scalability, replicability, and innovation in the distribution space, like district electrification, grid and resilience services from distributed energy resources, and battery energy storage. Those are some words that I know are some very important things and on the top of your priority list. So that's another opportunity, maybe one to partner on or to apply for yourself. Another one to mention briefly is the DOE's building energy efficiency frontiers and innovation technologies. Short word is benefits. They're calling this the new benefit program. Hopefully you've already been caught wind of it. The concept paper here would be due December 18th. The application itself wouldn't be due until April 30th, so a decent window. This is for folks that really want to get into the technical weeds and do some innovation here. There's $30 million across 9 topic areas, things like HVAC, roof and attics, electricity capacity constraints, trying to dive in to do some research and validate technologies with the potential to significantly enhance building decarbonization. So some of you might be trying to do that level of work, or maybe you want to partner with somebody and become like a site for someone to do this level of innovation and validation. Local governments, among others, are eligible. Like I said, you might be able to find a partner. If this is something you're really interested in, maybe we'll throw the need have board in. If you're looking for partners, you could throw it on the need have board that you're interested in partnership on this grant. The last funding opportunity I wanted to mention is from the EPA. This one has a long period, a long application period. So it's called the Environmental and Climate Justice Community Change Grants Program. Short is just Community Change Grants Program. You have until November 21st, 2024, so all the way, almost a whole year to apply. So they're accepting applications on a rolling basis. There's $2 billion available through the IRA to support community-driven projects that build capacity for communities to tackle environmental and climate justice challenges, strengthen their climate resilience, and advance clean energy. This one, the EPA provides grant application technical assistance for, so there's some help. And there's a couple of different tracks. One's called Community-Driven Investments for Change. That one, the range of funding is 10 million to 20 million, and they're expecting about 150 awards. The second track is called Meaningful Engagement for Equitable Governance, smaller, between 1 to 3 million, and they're anticipating about 20 awards. All of these, it looks like, are 3-year awards, and local governments are eligible as long as they partner with a CBO. So this one's sort of CBO-led. It could be a partnership between 2 CBOs or a partnership between a CBO and a local government, a tribe, or a higher education institution. Our friends that were here last month from EPN, Environmental Protection Network, I think that was what they call themselves, produced a 6-step application guide for this particular grant opportunity. So if you are interested in applying, there's some help here for you, both through the EPA and through EPN, who wants to provide support. I'll mention here too, because I had a little highlight up top, we're going to be talking a lot, I think, about the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. I also put a link there to, again, EPN's application guide. So they keep doing this, especially for EPA related grants, putting together step-by-step application guides. Helpful if you're one of those folks that are going to be applying for that implementation grant. That one is enormous. It's up to $500 million, you know, depending on the scale of your community. I'm thinking lots of you are tracking that one. And then that's it for funding on the ones I wanted to mention. Couple on input. I wanted to mention that we've been in contact with the California Energy Commission a lot. They've been wonderful in trying to talk with us about both their home energy rebate program, their $600 million allocation and how they're going to design that. And then the complementary program is the contractor training program, $10 million. They've shared with us the program concept. That's what's linked here, and you can look at it. They're interested in feedback and really letters of support from anybody who's interested in providing that for this particular program design and making their application as competitive and successful as possible. If you're interested in more information, I'd be happy if you contact me directly on that, and I'll share what I have. You can help us with our feedback as well. A last opportunity to provide a little feedback to CEC on this opportunity. And the last input opportunity I wanted to mention here was CARB. So CARB, again, back to the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. So CARB is actually taking the lead on submitting a state application for the implementation grant. And so right now they have a process where they've been doing some outreach around the state looking for basically shovel-ready emission reduction projects or programs that they can include into their application and into their what's called a state priority climate action plan. There is a short window for this. I actually really feel for them, and this program really the timing of it was interesting between planning and implementation, but there's not a lot of time to suggest some projects. But if you are interested in trying to get a template into CARB with some shovel-ready projects by December 19th, I have some information. I would email it to you. So email me directly and I'll just send it your way. It's really they are trying to target those communities outside of the metropolitan statistical area, which have received their own planning grants, and probably will receive their own implementation grants. So more of the hard to reach, under-resourced communities outside of metropolitan statistical areas. All right, so that's the rundown. One more slide for me. I was just starting to think, since we're year end and Roger and Stephen are going to talk to us about sort of a perspective too, just kind of a snapshot of where we're at. I just wanted to give you the list of things that are sort of on my mind that I think are worth paying attention to for next year. We're going to be tracking these programs on our end. Some are programs, some are more administrative processes. These are some of the things we're looking at for next year that you might want to keep on your list. And if you have other things that you're like, yeah, this next year, I know this thing is coming and I'm going to really pay attention to it, maybe prep myself to participate. We'd love to hear about that in the chat as well. I already mentioned the climate pollution reduction grant. There's going to be SB 100, a joint agency report we can provide input on. That's the 100% Clean Energy Act of 2018. There's CPUC equity and access grants. There's a lot here, and there's a lot for CEC, and we're really fortunate to continue to be partnering pretty closely and communicating with our friends at California Energy Commission along. So stick with us. We'll keep you updated as much as we can on all these things. But like I said, if you know of others that you think are really big, bold, interesting opportunities for local governments and their partners, put them in the chat. Okay, let's see. The chat looks pretty active, everyone, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move us along in our agenda to our next slide, which is really the meat of our discussion, and we're really fortunate to have two members of the CivicWell family here to present to you on policy updates for the year. We're going to start first with Roger Dickinson. He is CivicWell's policy director. He's going to give you a lead review. He'll be up for about 15 minutes, and then we'll go to Stephen Moss. He's Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition's regulatory consultant, and he's going to have another 15 minutes after that. We're going to take questions, and so as you're listening, please put questions in the chat, and we'll get to those after both of our lovely guests are finished. So with that, Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks again for being here.
Well, thank you, Angie, and good morning to all. Thank you for joining us, and happy holidays. We're going to do a very abbreviated and quick run through of a few pieces of legislation. I do want to note that if you are interested in more bills and more detail, the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition, LGSEC, does a legislative update that you can find and dig a little deeper into both more legislation and oh, there it is in the chat. It looks like, wow, ask and you shall receive. So let's launch, and we're going to talk about a few bills. We're going to talk about these at a very high level in the time we've got, and compared to some other years, I'm going to approach this a little differently because 2023 was quite an interesting year, and 2024 promises to be even more of a year. There were issues left over since it's the first year of the legislative session that will carry into 2024 that got some attention this year, but remain yet to be resolved. And so we can look forward to that in the coming year. I wanted to just spotlight AB 281 by Assemblymember Tim Grayson for you. There was a lot of legislation this year that aimed at post-entitlement permitting, including hookups to electric utilities for new construction. And this bill was aimed at, in particular, at special districts, not cities or counties themselves, but special districts that have to issue permits in association with new construction. Trying to get some time limits on that. There are certain places. San Francisco has become quite notorious on this for taking a very, very extended time, sometimes a year or two, to issue post entitlement permits. So this is an effort to try to rein that in, if you will, and so that people, once they've got their entitlements, can actually proceed to construction on a quicker basis. That bill did, as you can see, status chaptered. It made it through and signed by the governor, so it becomes law on January 1st. We go to the next one. AB 1132 by Assemblymember Laura Friedman. Not a enormous bill in and of itself, but important for giving an idea of the legislature's thinking and trying to make sure that solar is a point of emphasis. The permit system that limits costs on permits for residential and commercial systems was due to expire, and this legislation pushes it out another 10 years. So it will continue to make permitting costs either very low or actually not any cost at all for another decade. And it also passed and was signed into law. Okay, and next. AB 1567 is the first of two bond bills that I want to mention to you. This is a $15.9 billion bond proposed to go on the ballot in 2024 by Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. It covers a broad range of subjects related to climate, as you can see from the description. Including $2 billion for clean energy projects specifically. There'll have to be a lot of negotiation yet to come on this. That says the status is suspended. It is just sitting in a committee. It's still very much alive. But as you will see later, the corresponding Senate bill is SB 867 by Senator Ben Allen. And those two bills, somewhere along the line, if they're going to proceed, will need to be reconciled, and there'll need to be an agreement, not just in the legislature, but with the governor as well, as to what size bond to put on. There's also other subject matter for bonds, so there's a lot of competing proposals on bonds. Don't expect a $15 to $16 billion bond for climate to go on the ballot, if one goes on at all in 2024. It's likely to be substantially less than that, and it would be on the ballot in November of 2024 if in fact there's a bond bill. So this is one that made progress this year, a lot of input, but there's still an opportunity if you have an interest in this to get your comments and ideas in to be an advocate on it. So I would recommend keeping an eye on this one. Next one. I included SB 12 by Senator Stern because even though it died this year, I think it's an interesting indicator of where the legislature is. The legislature has been very aggressive and active on a number of climate-related bills, but was not ready to move to increasing the minimum GHG emission reduction goal by 2030. It's currently 40% that the law says we are expected to reduce GHG emissions by 2030. This, as you can see, would have upped that by another 15%. But the legislature was not willing to embrace this, and this has been true the last couple of years. So it says there is a ceiling or a limit to some extent on what the legislature is willing to do in terms of setting these goals. But I would not be surprised, look for Senator Stern potentially to come back with, or some other member with something close to this or related to this in the coming year. Why don't we go to the next one? SB 48 by Senator Josh Becker did become law, signed into law. It's really aimed at trying to reduce the GHG emissions out of larger buildings, both private and public buildings, 50,000 square feet or more. It started out as a more ambitious effort, but through the process became one of tracking energy usage data, and then trying to develop strategies through the CEC on practices and steps that can be taken to reduce GHG emissions from these larger buildings. As most, if not all of you know, the built environment continues to be the generator of a significant percentage of our GHG emissions. So that's what Senator Becker was aiming to try to get at by going after the larger buildings as an effort to try to have them incorporate measures and steps that will reduce the GHG emissions. So we'll see where this goes with the CEC. It'll be a little time in development, but I expect you may, again, in this coming year, see more on this front as well. And let's go to the next one. This is also a Senator Becker bill, SB 49. This one is interesting because what Senator Becker set out to do was look at public rights of way that could be used for renewable energy and related facilities. This also became law. It will have Caltrans and the CEC look along with the PUC looking at opportunities to locate clean energy facilities in particularly transportation rights of way, so that we can take advantage, say, for transmission or storage in particular, as we look at developing, say, offshore wind or solar resources on a collective basis. We need to be able to move that energy. We need to be able to store that energy. So finding land to do that is often time consuming and expensive. If we can make use of public rights of way, then perhaps we can speed up the time and reduce the cost. And let's go to the next one. There were a couple bills this year that were notable. They go in the direction more of tracking and mandating reports by the private sector on what they're doing in terms of GHG emissions. The first of these bills is SB 253 by Senator Scott Wiener. As you can see, it would require corporations exceeding a certain threshold of revenues that do business in California to report on their GHG emissions. And so the effort here is, in a sense, by public disclosure, bring pressure, I would say, on these corporations to do more to reduce their GHG emissions. It also can serve to identify where GHG emissions are coming from as far as privately generated emissions. At what point in the process of production are those GHG emissions getting produced? And that would allow potentially the legislature and the state to target those areas where the largest GHG emissions are being generated in order to come up with measures to reduce the emissions with respect to those kinds of activities. So this is going to be one to watch. As you can see, the governor signed it into law, actually with a great deal of flourish. And the next bill. Similarly, this is the second bill that was quite notable, also signed by the governor with a certain amount of flourish, SB 261 by Senator Stern, and it again goes at the private sector by requiring companies with more than 500 million in annual revenues doing business in California to disclose how they deal with climate-related financial risk. This has become quite a topic in both the energy and insurance sectors. We see a lot of activity across the state across the country on this. In some places, there really are moves, particularly by Republican legislatures, to try to prevent any kind of association of climate-based risk with the activities of a company. So we're going in the quite opposite direction in California. This will again hopefully give us information that allows us in an informed way to identify and target those areas where there's greater climate-related financial risk, and we can take appropriate action to mitigate that and reduce it. How about the next one? This bill was sponsored by CivicWell, by Senator Catherine Blakespear, and some of you are familiar with this. I know it would have required the Air Resources Board to produce greenhouse gas inventories for cities and counties, particularly with regard to producing their climate action plans or targeting their investments. The bill died in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Senator Blakespear is interested in coming back this coming year with another attempt at this, but we'll continue to be very much engaged on this legislation. Let's go to the next one. This is AB 867 by Senator Allen that I mentioned earlier in association with AB 1567. It's a little smaller, about $500 million, 400 million less, 15.5 billion in bonds, again across a broad range. Again, a bill to keep an eye on, stay involved with. Going to be a very active discussion in the coming year. And let's go to the next one. Oh, that was the last one. Okay. Well, I have, looks like, Angie, just a minute or two. And in that regard, first of all, I want to thank you all for your involvement and engagement on legislative issues. I also want to just point out that we're headed into, again, some very difficult budget times at the state level. The legislative analyst, known as the LAO, has projected that the state is looking at a $68 billion deficit. This year, the legislature addressed about a $30 billion deficit, and the expectation was that the deficit for next year would be about the same order of magnitude. But the income taxes and revenues that came in, especially during the fall with the delayed payment date due to the pandemic, those revenues fell substantially short of the projections, about $26 billion short of what had been projected. So that has amplified the deficit considerably. I suppose the one silver lining is, in percentage terms, this deficit is actually smaller than the deficit the state faced in 2009-10. So it will be perhaps a little easier to solve it. Also, the state is in a better financial position in terms of reserves. The state has about $25 to $30 billion set aside in the rainy day fund that was established a number of years ago as part of getting out of the last budget challenge of the Great Recession. So there's a little bit more in the way of resources tucked away that the state can call on. But I would expect we're going to see cuts proposed by the governor when he unveils his proposed budget in early January. I would anticipate that those cuts would be in the nature of programs that or expenditures that are more recent in time as opposed to longer standing. We'll have to wait and see what the governor proposes, and of course then what the legislature decides to do. But it's clear it's going to be another very challenging budget year, and that's going to have an impact in all likelihood not just on some of the newer programs, but on a lot of the climate-related issues as it did this year. And it's going to have an impact on the discussion about the bond bills, I would expect it as well. So, Angie, with that, let me call it a day as far as that presentation is concerned, and we'll go to Stephen.
Sounds good. Thank you, Roger. That was excellent. Roger's going to hang around after Stephen's conversation to answer some questions, so please do put those in the chat. Tila also put into the chat our legislative update for 2023. So that's a whole link that you could download with a full report on a lot of the stuff that you just heard from Roger. And thank you, Roger, for trying to sprinkle a little optimism on maybe a otherwise tough update for the budget. All right, Stephen, let's go to you now and hear some regulatory updates. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Angie. I'm afraid I tried to find a through line for the regulatory activities at the mostly CPUC this year, and they're kind of a bummer, similar to the budget. I should have tried to find a different arc. And for those of you who participate in LGSEC, some of these slides might be a bit of a repeat, but hopefully I'll put a different spin on them, or they'll have some different impact. So if you go to the next slide. So I think the main message here for this year is that we had kind of an alarming steady increase in electricity prices, predominantly on behalf of PG&E, and some signs of weakened regulatory policing. There's also some activity related to solar, which I'm going to touch upon, and I noticed that a question went by on that. If you go to the next slide. So what seems to be happening in PG&E service territory is kind of ever rising rates. And this is a little bit of a noisy slide, but the bottom line is, if you look at the end of the words, the bullets, we're seeing a 28% increase in residential rates in PG&E service territory for this coming year, and almost a 37% increase for some customers, in this case, farm customers, agricultural customers. Which is notable, and also puts the rates, and you can see them there at a fairly high level. The reason why this is kind of a messy slide is that the way in which rate increases are implemented, they're decided in specific proceedings in which there is a lot of discussion and arguments by stakeholders and others, but they're implemented through what's called advice letters, and it makes it difficult to actually track increases or changes in rates. And this is just illustrative of that. PG&E had two different advice letters in this case that move things around, but in the end, the outcome on a year-to-year basis are these almost 30% increases for residential customers. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that PG&E is a little bit alone in the alarmingness of its increases compared to Edison. Edison actually kind of didn't produce these kind of results. I did want to point out, because we're dominated by local governments, that street lights are getting quite expensive to keep powered. And with local governments entering into the fiscal year, or not the calendar year, with threatened lower state money and also their own budget problems, smaller local governments may face some competing budget priorities around electrifying street lights. It's happened in the past that because of higher street light rates, governments have to cut back on other things that they might want to prefer to do. So even though Edison is not as bad, anywhere near as bad as PG&E, it's still showing signs of pretty high rates. If you go to the next slide, the question I think is, why? What's going on? Senate Bill 695 required a report to examine this topic, because it's not a new thing that rates have been going up. It's been happening steadily for the last couple of years. And a significant variable seems to be wildfire costs. And these are dominated in PG&E because PG&E has a more expansive and kind of wooded area than Edison. It doesn't explain what's going on in San Diego, and there'll be another slide on that in a minute, but it appears that wildfire expenses are kind of driving a lot of these increases in costs, at least for PG&E. These costs may be starting to go down, but there's no guarantee of that. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that in general, and this now pops up with San Diego Gas and Electric, the three large investor-owned utilities in California, they have high prices, they have high rates relative to other utilities in the state, and all these other utilities are smaller. So it might be that size does matter when it comes to utility rates. How to unpack, this comparison we could talk about for many hours. But the bottom line is that we have some pretty high rates coming off in terms of our IOUs. San Diego is amongst the highest rates in the country. We go to the next slide. And this just is a kind of a warning signal, which is that what has normally happened in California is that we have always had high rates relative to the rest of the country, but we have a mild climate. And as a result, our bills have been lower generally than, for example, the Northeast, where they suffer through much stronger winters, much more inclement weather. That may be changing, particularly the risk of very extreme weather on either side, extreme heat or extreme cold. And that could result in bill impacts that are unusual for the state. And it would appear to be a continuing possibility that this idea that we're going to have high rates and higher bills as a result of changing weather conditions could be a chronic condition. Just sort of it's a warning. And again, I'm sorry, I told you I was going to be a bit of a bummer here. Next slide. This is my final. I almost feel like I laid this on too thick, but this is what happened this year. There's a proceeding that is currently going on to examine how the distribution system should accommodate electrification, because part of our climate plans are to increasingly electrify, we know, transportation, buildings, everything, as Roger pointed out in some of the legislative activities. And there have been estimates that range from $26 billion from Cal Advocates to upwards of $50 billion from an independent analytical consulting firm hired by the CPUC to examine this issue. Very large investments that may be needed into the grid in order to accommodate electrification. It should be noted that these estimates do not really examine the dynamic ability to manage them differently, managing them, including by changing the way in which the timing of which people use electricity, or relieving the distribution system of its centralized investment through distributed energy resources. So these aren't exactly worst case scenarios, but they are bad case scenarios. And in either event, we're looking to drive a lot of electricity into new electricity demand in the coming decade. The balancing act of this is whether this new investment in electrification will result in a moderation in rates because the cost will be spread out over more kilowatt hours. So the question is, you make a huge investment, you're basically creating an enormous amount of demands for an additional amount of energy, but that demand will then spread out. For example, if you're not buying gasoline for your car, you're buying electricity. So there's kind of an ameliorating happening and resulting in actually a release of pressure on electricity rates. That's a theory. There hasn't been a lot of empirical evidence to support that yet, but it is potentially part of the story. So if we go to the next slide. A disturbing trend is that the CPUC has been called on account by the state auditor related to its oversight capacity. There's a bunch of bullets here that gets through what the auditor found, but they, and again, sorry to be a bummer, but they found a lot of kind of structural problems with the way in which particularly Cal Advocates, which is responsible for a lot of the examination and evaluation of the investor-owned utilities investments, how they go about doing their business. One thing that struck out to me is that there is a number of what are called balancing accounts. These are basically accounts that the utilities set up in order to track expenses that are authorized but are not really, that really need to be examined. Well, they're largely not examined. So we have hanging out there essentially blank checkbooks for the utilities that no one is really paying a lot of attention to. It's possible that they're very accurate and the utilities are doing a wonderful job at maintaining careful expenditures, but we don't know. And at the bottom, it talks about poor communication about rate increases. I just want to dovetail that to the way in which rate increases happen. Like I mentioned, they're through advice letters. And so they stutter step. So it's really hard for like a normal, regular ratepayer paying their bills to really understand what's going to happen to their bills without actually close examination, because they go up at different points in time. And that creates a sort of uncertainty. And we know that consumers don't like uncertainty and kind of random price increases probably more than anything. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed. Next slide. This is getting on my last slide after I gave you all this bad news, is that so the frame of these cost increases and these problems is not wholly about climate change. It's not because California is investing in electrification at a much higher level than other places. Although it is true that and based upon what's going on right now with international climate discussions, that there is increasingly an apparent divergence between what California is attempting to do and the rest of the world is actually willing to do. It doesn't appear that the rest of the world, at least in this moment, based upon the current international discussions, is willing to follow California in its accelerated drive to eliminate fossil fuels from its economy. California, on the other hand, is being successful in creating an atmosphere in which electrification is going to be the dominant fuel. But I should finish my thought on that. It's not climate change that is causing necessarily these unaffordable rates. What we saw with the other report was wildfire costs and other adjustments that are happening. But what is looming is, as I pointed out, from the potential need to invest, $20 to $50 billion in electrification in the grid, that it could start becoming part of the story in a much more dominant way. Here we see a success story, and this is US-wide, that we're slowly getting past gas furnaces, and there are many local and state efforts to eliminate the use of gas furnaces in lieu of heat pumps that have emerged. This is a thing, and it is happening. What is not shown is the changes, obviously, in electric vehicles. We are essentially at the kink in the curve in terms of what's going to happen with electric vehicles. They're steadily increasing. In some places, like San Francisco, they're as much as 40% of new vehicle purchases, but they're not yet dominant. At some point, that they're going to look like this heat pump chart. And when that happens, the implications to the grid will be profound. And the question is whether or not the regulators in the state will get ahead of the potential affordability problems that's going to cause, or whether that's actually going to create, as I mentioned, more demand that will soak up these costs in a more cost-effective way. So with that, I gave you a lot of information, kind of a bummer, but at least it's sort of the sense of where we are now. Next year is next year. Things may change again, but I think this is sort of the through line for what happened in general in the last year. I had mentioned that there was going to be slides about the solar things that were happening in solar. Turns out that's for our conference in January. So come to that if you want to hear more about what happened with net energy metering last year. But essentially we killed it as a short story, or we greatly diminished net energy metering in terms of individual rooftops and also multifamily buildings for a host of reasons. So with that, I don't believe I have any more slides, and I'll give it back to Angie. And thanks to the LGSCC members who you see all here. It's a very colorful slide for participating, engaging, and supporting all of our efforts.
Thank you, Stephen. And folks here who aren't familiar with LGSCC may want just a little more information about how they could connect with you further. Do you want to share any more?
Well, LGSCC is a membership organization. You're very welcome to join. I don't believe the dues are very onerous. So you can certainly reach out to me or to the contact number above. We engage in regulatory proceedings as a stakeholder, and we try to shape regulatory agendas on specific issues. We also watch them, and we participate in workshops and collaboration. So LGSCC gives you a voice at the California Public Utility Commission, to a lesser extent at the California Energy Commission. And we certainly, as you can see, this is what I did today in terms of these slides represents a fraction of the proceedings that we're currently tracking or being engaged in. So you'd be more than welcome to join, and certainly reach out to me or that contact or John if you want to know more about LGSCC. And Angie, thank you for that prompt.
Sure, and thank you, Stephen and Roger. Great presentations, and you stayed right on your 15-minute mark. What pros! I just love this CivicWell team of ours. So you can probably get the picture. You know, LGSEC is the cousin program of SEEK. They're a membership organization. They handle mainly regulatory issues, and Roger does policy direction. SEEK here, we're here trying to track some of the more administrative actions for you. CivicWell's kind of got all the angles covered. Let's go to some questions. So I got a question from Nick Freeman, and I think this is for you, Roger. Is there a working group or SME team on the climate resilience districts?
Angie, is there a working group? Could you?
Yeah, it says, is there a working group or SME? I'm not sure what that means. SME team on the climate resilience districts.
No, not to my knowledge. There has been some interest in climate resilience districts from some localities and some local elected officials. Sonoma County is probably the most advanced because they were actually grandfathered into being a climate resilience district by virtue of previous legislation that created their climate authority. To the best of my knowledge, no one has actually begun the process of trying to create a climate resilience district beyond Sonoma, but that's not altogether surprising. It generally takes a while for these kinds of pieces of legislation to become known locally, and then for people to figure out that maybe it applies here, and then to go through the process. But I'm not. We did a webinar in January or early February. I guess it might have been. That's still available on the CivicWell website, I believe. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any team working on trying to help create them.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Nick, for that question. Another one for you, Roger. NJ Nevado is asking, can we expect delays on some of these bills due to the $68 billion deficit?
Well, I would say that anything that proposes new money is going to have a very, very hard hill to climb in the legislature this year, this coming year. In terms of the bond bills, I think there's desire for an education bond bill and some other subject matters as well. The question will be whether or not some of the cuts that might have to be made in programs could be incorporated in the bond bills. The governor suggested that last year when he released his proposed budget. Mitigating that potential, though, or offsetting that potential to a certain extent, is the likelihood that the appetite of the voters to approve bonds may not be terribly strong. So it means the amount in bonds could be much lower than what's been proposed. Just as an illustration, the 2014 water bond was $7.5 billion, and that was thought to be a lot at that time. So just by comparison, you see the two bills, climate bills that are bond bills that are live, propose over $15 billion. If there's something that emerges there, I would expect it would probably be again below 10 billion ultimately, and I would expect just again to underline it that anything that's seeking new funding out of the state general fund is going to have very tough sledding.
Okay, so we'll hang our hopes on bonds for now. Roger, do you have any feeling for the federal side? I mean, are we just still benefiting from the big investments that were made? Do you see any silver linings in the federal budget?
Well, I would just say that, yeah, Angie, I think that what we're going to see for the next couple 3 years at least is the allocation of the money that was authorized and appropriated in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment Act and in the Deficit Reduction Act. There's not going to be, or it certainly doesn't appear there's going to be new money beyond that. But then those two bills amounted to hundreds of billions of dollars. So there's a long way to go to allocate and dispense that money.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to jump to one for Stephen here. Let's see. Tom Cabot is asking, how might cities encourage this sort of more power efficient electrification to fit more affordable electrification on the grid? That's a hard question.
It's a very hard question. In fact, the proceeding that I mentioned, that those studies where they were talking about a $20 to $50 billion grid investment that may be necessary, the whole point of the proceeding is to see whether or not we can accommodate distributed energy resources of the kind that a lot of local governments want to do, solar and storage or microgrids and the like, into the grid in a way that relieves the grid of pressure. And there's strong interest in that from the state. One LGSEC member is the General Services Agency. They want to be adding their own power and relieve the grid of pressure. And every indication is that that is a plausible strategy, but it is one that the utilities have not accommodated yet. And the CPUC haven't found a way to be able to create the right planning mechanisms to enable it to happen. So that is a live question. And one in which LGSEC is going to continue to track and intervene in as things go. This is a long answer, but most recently there has been a $1.5 million consulting agreement proposed to examine this issue more closely. And we're going to participate in a discussion about how that study can be framed so that it properly accounts for local government's ability to provide lower cost electrification as well as the private sector. So this is an ongoing discussion. If you're not part of LGSEC, not to make a pitch, please engage. We have a working group on that exact topic where we're actively working with the local governments that are having problems getting distributed energy resources online because of various blockages. So it is an active issue for us.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for that answer, Stephen. Another one for you, Stephen, is from Alex Yazbek. He says this is also fascinating. Any idea how or why the non-IOU can provide electricity at such a lower rate? Are IOU customers subsidizing the low rates? Is there a simple answer to this question?
So I almost want to say this is off the record because this is my own opinion. It's also the opinion of my colleague. I work with an economic consulting firm that has been in business for more than 30 years. The whole idea of utility monopolies is that they have, under an economic theory, downward sloping marginal costs. In other words, that the incremental cost of providing a unit of electricity is lower as the size of monopoly increases. There is every indication that the investor-owned utilities no longer meet that monopoly criteria, that they are too big. And the available evidence suggests that much smaller utility sizes provide for a much better and more cost-effective provision of electricity. That's my off-the-record opinion, is that our utilities have become too large, and as a result, they are no longer providing or meeting even the requirements necessary to be protected as a monopoly. There are more complex answers than that, but that's a simple one I'll give you, is that I think that our structure is protecting a system that is no longer economic.
All right. And then there's a question here that could be for both of you, I think, from Justin. And he says, can Roger, but perhaps Stephen too, comment on the politics behind reducing the amount of rooftop solar users can obtain from SCE, PG&E, and SDG&E by the CPUC thing?
Well, I would just say that has been I think a dominant narrative that the subsidy, the net energy metering paradigm that has been used has amounted to a subsidy for better off people economically to get rooftop solar and its benefits at the expense of people who are less well off economically. And whether that narrative is accurate or correct or not, I think that is a narrative that is widely accepted among the elected officials and staff, as well as the PUC staff and PUC members. So the proceeding to address the net energy metering standards really, I think, was then framed as an effort by the PUC, and some efforts in the legislature did not move, but on this subject, but at the PUC was framed as a way to be more equitable and fair in terms of who was paying the costs and who was receiving the benefits of rooftop solar. So there are, others certainly who saw the hand of the IOUs as being less than benign in all of this, and Stephen may want to comment on that. But I think that what I've described, I think, reflects the overall politics of the issue.
Yeah, I agree with Roger that was the atmosphere in which the discussion happened. And I will say, setting aside the accuracy of that or not, that it's not actually a great strategy to allow to just spread solar around like salt on a table without consideration of the implications to the distribution system. And that a more careful approach, the value depends on where the solar is on the grid, and solar, particularly solar plus storage, which the PUC is recognizing now, can actually provide additional value that reduces the need for grid investment if prompted properly. So in setting aside the atmospherics of it, there is a reality that is probably not the best economic strategy to allow 1,000 solar flowers to bloom pell-mell without consideration of how that impacts the grid. But that, on the other hand, if we actually created a system in which distributed energy resources, solar storage, and other things could be productive and allow for reductions in the centralized grid, that would be a very good thing. And hopefully that's where the commission will go next.
Thank you both. In the interest of time, I do want to make sure we close out for folks that need to go right at the hour. Like I said, we do have 15 extra minutes here at the end. I don't know, Roger or Stephen, if you're available for another 15 minutes to handle any more questions. If not, you gotta go, then please do. But everybody else, hang around if you can. Let's go to I want to say thank you, first of all, to Stephen and Roger for taking time out of their busy schedule and giving you lots of good insights. We could do this for another hour and still learn a whole lot more. Let's go to the next slide, please. It's going to wrap us up. Just to remind you all that we do have our save the date out for the 2024 SEEK Forum, and we really hope to see you there in person on June 25th and 26th in Palm Springs. We are developing the forum as we speak, and you can learn more all about it at the link that we'll throw there in the chat as well. And thanks to those of you that I think are already participating on an advisory committee. One more thing I wanted to mention here, and I think I'll just throw a link in the chat, is many of you who are local government representatives have received an invitation to our state and local energy and climate coordination meeting that's happening on Thursday, December 14th. So this is just another reminder to say, please come if you did receive that invitation. Right now it is just for local government representatives and our state partners. We're going to have a great conversation. It's our third of 3 listening sessions with CARB on barriers to local climate action. We're going to dive really deep on the nuts and bolts and guts of how to do a GHG inventory and where those pain points are and how we might overcome those barriers. So if that's a issue for you and you have something you might like to contribute, then please join us if you're a local government staff member. Okay, let's go to our last slide. So what's next? We've got our bonus breakout for the next 15 minutes after this, and then we want to wish you a really happy holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year, January 9th, back here at Learn for our monthly calls. Feel free to share this invitation with others. We appreciate you coming back every month. And with that, I think we'll close out the formal part of the learn and we'll move into our less formal part. If we go to our